Now, after we added the Spring Data GPA dependency and MySQL connector dependency, the next step to enable our application to be able to communicate with the database is to update properties file of our application and to add the database connection details. So I will go to resources folder, and under the resources folder, I will have application.properties file. I'll click on it, and currently it's empty, and you can use this file to add different properties that your code can then read from. To add database connection details for Spring Data GPA to be able to connect to the database, it will need to know username, password, and then database name. So if you start typing Spring and then put dot, it will suggest you the properties that you can use. So for example, Spring data source and then username is the property key that you need to use to provide database connection username. So in my case, it is Sergey. And exactly the same way you add a property key for a password. So I type Spring data source and then password. And the password is also Sergey. The next property key is the data source URL. So it starts the same way, Spring data source and then URL. And this is the connection URL to your database. So it goes like this, JDBC and then MySQL and then the IP address. If your database is running locally on your computer, then it goes localhost. If you deploy your application to a different computer and the database is on that same computer, then most likely it will also be a localhost. But if your web service is running on one computer, but the database is on another computer, then here you can provide the IP address of that computer, which is hosting the database. And then port number 3306. And if your database is running on a remote computer, then you'll need to make sure that port 3306 is open for that connection. But if it's on localhost, then don't worry about it. And then the name of your database. In my case, I will create a database called photo app. This is very important. If you do not provide correct database name, then Spring Data GPA will not be able to connect to your database. And one more database related property key, and this one is related to creating a database schema for us. It starts with Spring and then goes GPA and then Hibernate DDL Auto. This one can have multiple values. If I hold Control button on my keyboard and then tap on spacebar, it will suggest me to select one of these 5. So the first one will create and destroy previous data in our database. When we run our application, if our database table does not exist, Hibernate will create that database table based on the entity class that we have defined in our application. So if that table does not exist, it will create it. But if it does exist, it will destroy the previous data. So be careful with this one. Then we have create and drop. We have none, update, and validate, which doesn't do any changes to your database. It simply validates the schema. For my application, I will choose update. My database table will still be created when my application starts up, but with the update option, Hibernate will attempt to update our database schema by adding new columns, for example, but it will not remove anything. It will not delete data and will not remove existing columns. Just try to update existing database schema on the fly based on the annotations that we have specified in our entity class. So I will choose this option, and this is all we need at this moment to make our application be able to connect to the database and then read information and write information into our database tables. So let's continue to the next video.